Welcome to the Narcissist Slayers, a podcast focusing on recovery from narcissistic abuse. I'm your co-host, Hope Jay.
And I'm your co-host, Lynn Catalano.
And we are both survivors of narcissistic abuse. I am also an attorney working with survivors of narcissistic abuse and the founder and president of the Center for Hope of Western New York.
I'm an attorney, a narcissistic abuse coach, and the author of Wrecking Ball Relationships: How to Identify, Live With, or Leave the Narcissist in Your Life. Learn more about me at lynncatalano.com.
At the Center for Hope, we offer hope, help, and healing from narcissistic abuse. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide legal advocacy, mental health support, financial advisement, and holistic healing services to help you down the path from victim to survivor.
You can find out more about our services by checking out our website, centerforhopewny.org. And please follow us on all platforms of social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Center for Hope WNY for helpful information about recovery from narcissistic abuse.
Welcome back to the Narcissist Slayers with your co-hosts Hope Jay and Lynn Catalano.
Hi.
And today we are going to follow up with the second part of our podcast from last month. And last month we spent a good amount of time talking about what it's like to grow up in a household with a narcissistic parent.
Yes.
And how that impacts your childhood, your sense of self-worth, your reality based on the emotional abuse that occurs within the household and how you perceive that as a child, and sort of the long-term consequences, trauma that happens to people who are raised by narcissistic parents.
Yes.
And today we thought a good follow-up to that would be to take it into more or less into adulthood, and how if you don't deal with and heal that trauma, which most of us, myself included, didn't. I wouldn't say that it was like any sort of a deliberate act. It's not like, I'm like, I have all this trauma, I'm just going to ignore it. It's more like you don't realize the effects of the trauma.
Yes.
And you really, without having that level of self-awareness, and most, young adults when you're in your 20s and even in your 30s and 40s, a lot of times we just don't have that level of self-awareness because we haven't put the pieces together yet.
But
right?
It's funny because I tell people, if you don't address this trauma, it bleeds into all aspects of your life. And I know that's what we're going to talk about today.
And it does. And that's the challenge, right? It's like a two-part challenge. The first part is to recognize that you actually are suffering from, trauma from your childhood, right? I mean, we all have trauma from our childhood. But it takes a good amount of time for a lot of us to recognize that, we may have been raised by a narcissistic parent. And I know it took you, well into your adult years after you'd already had kids. And, I think that's true for most of us. That, at some point we have to reckon with our childhood. And I think for a lot of us, and again, I you're a bit of a unicorn this way, but for a lot of us, it comes, we start having to reckon with this when it comes time for us to enter into intimate relationships as adults. And that is, I think, the the challenge that we face as adults is when we haven't reconciled or healed that trauma.
Right.
That we are sort of unconsciously or subconsciously seeking romantic partners that sort of match that wound, that wound that we've suffered as a child, and a good amount of time growing up in a narcissistic household. We tend to become caretakers. We tend to become really full-fledged codependents because we learned that our value is only as good as the narcissist recognizing us as being worthy to them. So we don't recognize our own internal sense of worth.
Right. But this is not a unique situation in the sense that it's known that people who grow up with a parent who's an alcoholic
Yes.
or drug addict,
Yeah.
they seek that type of
Yes.
addictive personality. Or God forbid, if you grow up in a home
domestic violence,
yes, that you end up with that
Yes.
again.
And it's so counterintuitive, isn't
Yes.
it? You think that you grow up with this sort of, horrible abusive
Yes.
behavior, or
You would go the
you would go the
opposite way.
opposite way, and some people do.
Like, yes.
But
thank
it's
God,
almost
yes.
like a fluke, I think, that people. Well, it's interesting because I have I don't know if my sister cares about this because she talks about it, but she married somebody who had addiction issues at a young age, and he's been sober forever now, and that's all great. But she always would say, when I would say, well, look at me, I've had such a difficulty finding a partner, and she would always say, it was luck. It was luck that she found, because she, in her youth, she had the same sorts of issues growing up in the same house as me,
right.
Found somebody that kind of matched her wounds. But he was not a narcissist and was interested in leveling up, right? He wanted to get sober. He wanted to do better. And I think that you have better luck sometimes with addicts who, decide that they're going to get sober.
Right.
Because as you and I know, and we tell people all the time, narcissists can't change.
No.
They can't change. No. They won't change.
No.
It's a lot of, we waste a lot of time, energy, and effort investing in these, hopes, and as Chump Lady always says, smoking the hopium, right? Believing that there's something that we can do in these relationships.
But perhaps one of the reasons that people don't recognize that they're seeking that same person, right? It's so obvious in those other situations we just described, whereas we haven't even, for us, look, it took me until adulthood to recognize that I was raised by a narcissist.
Right.
If you don't even realize that, you're out there, looking for a soulmate, and you end up with that same person.
Right.
So today we're going to explore some personal stuff with you. I feel like last time we explored some personal stuff with me. So
no, I mean, it's so true. And I see there's lots of people talking about this phenomenon, on the internet. I see that there's a lot of women who have kind of reached this epiphany in their adult life and realized that, they do have some control over their choices and over their, who they allow into their life. But I think it takes a long time when you don't know yourself and you don't understand why you're making these choices. Sometimes you think it's random. Like if you had asked me 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to articulate any of this to you. I wouldn't have understood why I keep having these relationships that are, so emotionally, dysfunctional, that cause me so much pain and so much grief, and that I would, it's like the relationship repetition syndrome. I've learned about this as well. But it's like, you finally get the strength to get out of one of these relationships, and then you find yourself back in a similar type of a relationship with another person. It's like, a same personality type in a different body. And until you heal the stuff inside of you, it's like you're putting out that energy into the world subconsciously. It's like, it's the human magnet syndrome. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It was one of the most informative, enlightening books that I've ever read. I can't think of the author's name right now. I should have researched that before we did this today, but you can Google it, the human magnet syndrome. And it's really about the relationship between codependents and narcissists, and how we find each other, why we find each other, and why that codependent narcissist relationship, it works, but it works like to the major disadvantage of the codependent and the major advantage of the narcissist. So it's the codependent that is struggling and feeling as if they're dying in this relationship, while the narcissist is, on their merry way.
Wow. Because
we are, codependents are literally like batteries for narcissists.
We know that.
I say all the time, it's like why we are dubbed the narcissist slayers, right? I think everyone has heard that the old adage about narcissists being emotional vampires. And that's why we're the narcissist slayers.
That's
so
right.
we're out here slaying those emotional vampires. But
so Hope, will you share with our audience what happened? Like, when did you take a step back and say maybe these events are connected? Like maybe these relationships are connected?
yeah. So I don't think it was until I was in my 40s. Although I had a series of relationships, at least one a decade, right?
Wow.
I was married for a period of time, and I would say that it was one of the better choices that I made. My ex-husband, I don't believe, is a narcissist. We had other issues, of course, but I found myself gravitating, toward that personality type. I gravitated toward it in my early, younger years. I gravitated toward it after my divorce.
Right.
And, it's almost like a gravitational pull. I don't know how to explain it. Anyone who has, experienced this out there who's listening, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because we've been in it. It's like you feel this almost instantaneous connection with this person. You don't understand why. It's like an energy exchange that you're experiencing. And I'm going to say something right now. I don't know how popular this opinion is, but I have to say it. I've talked about this with other friends who have lived through this. I think a lot of women, or most women, we're conditioned in ways to think that love is supposed to hurt.
Ooh.
And I think that, we're conditioned in ways that we think we're supposed to suffer for love. And, that these emotional, ups and downs and all of this back and forth, hot and cold, this thing that like in the movies that we see all the time. I like to use the Carrie, Mr. Big analogy. Everyone knows the Sex and the City. If Big wasn't the biggest narcissist on the planet, he was literally the prototype of a narcissist. And we're being fed this, in popular culture, we're being fed this in romance novels and books, that these avoidant, hard to get or hard to connect with these men who are terrified of emotional intimacy, that these are the guys we're supposed to want. And that we're supposed to just put ourselves through whatever it is, the bad boy, we're going to jump through hoops of fire, we're going to eviscerate ourselves, for these men. And that's what we, so some of it is, I think this is the sort of the recipe that we've been given for romantic love.
Awful.
Right? Awful.
Yeah.
I think, what's the other one? The 50 Shades of Grey. There's another one. You know what I mean? Like, these are all, and even I would go so far as to say it's Twilight. Where like there's just so many messages that we get as women, as young girls, that we're not worthy.
Right.
And we're not worthy of real supportive, emotionally open and available men. And even that they're not attractive, right? They're portrayed always as the friend, their friend zone, they're, the weak one. So it's, Barbie's done some to try to correct that. Barbie's done some to correct that.
I was just going to say that sounds like Mojo Jojo.
Isn't that nice though? But it's now 2023. So we did not grow up with that.
No.
The Disney stories, everything. So you have that. And then on top of it, when you are, these are not the messages you're just getting from outside, but you're getting from inside of your, the calls coming from inside the house. You're getting it in your own household. You're learning, because you're growing up in a narcissistic household, that you don't matter, your needs don't matter. The only sense of validation that you get is through the approval of your narcissistic parent.
Wow.
So, your self-esteem is in the toilet, but you don't know it.
You don't
understand it, because usually women who grow up with this personality profile, we are very proficient in lots of other ways, right? We're generally intelligent.
Right.
We work hard.
Yes.
We're successful in business.
Yes.
We're successful in all these other areas of our life, but we keep on stumbling in relationships. And it is, and of course, we're perfectionists, so we blame ourselves. It's so easy to get caught up with these guys who are basically predators, who latch onto us, right? Like little, leeches, or, like they're emotional vampires. We find we're codependent, so we want to fix, help, save, right? We want to take care of them. We want to show them that our love land is the love that's going to save them, right? We're going to show them that there is love in this world. And that's the trap that I got caught in over and over and over. I never found a fully formed human being. I found these quote unquote fixer-uppers. And I know that people are listening, they're I'm sure relating to this, is you see the potential, right? And how many times,
change that.
How many times, that's right, how many times do healthy people say, don't fall in love with potential, right? Because, you can't change that person. You can't change them. No. You think you can because you've got these codependent tendencies that are, you're wired that way. Yeah. So that's the trap. Yeah. And that's why, women who are otherwise successful in lots of other areas of their life stumble in this area. Wow. And until you realize that you're settling for so much less than you're worth, because you have to up level in your own mind. You have to rewire your own, dysfunctional patterns of thinking. Because as long as you believe that that's acceptable to you, it's another thing that I'm giving Chump Lady the credit. She says it all the time in her article. She said the first question she asks people when they write in is this relationship acceptable to you?
Whew, what a heavy question.
Right? But it's such a good one. Yeah. Because if you have to ask yourself, why am I putting up with this? When I deep down in my bones, I don't trust this person. Right. There's probably been some sort of reason to believe that they've been unfaithful, because generally they are. Yes. Most of them are. Yes. They're not just unfaithful in the romantic part of your relationship. They usually are, they're abusing you in lots of other areas. They're financially abusing you. So money is going all different places and you don't know where it is. They're out doing things, probably, other things. Who knows? They have a hooker habit, they're gambling, they're doing all kinds of things. They may have a drug habit or not. They're doing all kinds of things that make you feel unsafe, but yet when you confront them about it, you're gaslit. Right? They don't acknowledge it. They make you think like you're the crazy one. They blame you for even confronting them about it. Round and round you go. Round and round you go. Right?
Okay, so what can we tell our audience if they're identifying with your story? If they're saying, I was in a bad relationship with someone like that, but I'm out, so I'm fine.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah. I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm here to tell you you're not good.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, you need to talk to someone. Like, this is exactly the work that I do. Yes. This is the work that our other providers do. We have both therapists and coaches that do this. Yes. So here's the thing. First of all, if you have been in this type of relationship and you haven't done this yet, please go explore your own credit report. I have a client who didn't know that there were loans taken out in her name and bills that weren't paid, because this financial abuse, they will go and destroy your credit. I have another client who had second and third mortgages taken out on their home, on their family home.
Very common.
And credit cards in their adult children's names. Destroyed the kids' credit.
All of these things. And vastly so much more. Yes. But I don't want to focus on them today. I want to focus on you. Not you, Lynn, not necessarily, but by you, I mean our listeners. I want to focus on our listeners. I want people to think about themselves. Okay. Because that's the thing where I think, we get caught up in all of this other stuff, and we don't take the time to focus on what I said earlier about, is this relationship acceptable to me? Because that's the starting point for your work. Because if deep down, we all have an inner voice. It's been stomped out and and decimated by abuse, especially if you grew up in an abusive household and then have had a series of abusive relationships. Yeah. But I'm here to tell you, it's still there. It's inside you. It's your survival mechanism that's in there telling you, communicating to you. It's like when things feel bad, when you're in pain, that is your inner voice telling you this is not acceptable to you. even though you're twisting yourself into a pretzel and bending over backwards to try to stay in the relationship, to make the relationship, whatever it is, you have children, you have, sunk costs, you have spent a lot of time with this person, you can't imagine your life without him. I am here to tell you that yes, you can, but you literally have to start like at the beginning, because there's a lot of work involved in more or less rewiring your negative thought patterns, because until and unless you decide, it's a decision. You have to decide that you are not going to be a victim of anybody else's abuse anymore, okay? And in order to do that, there's a lot of things that you have to reckon with inside of yourself. And first one being, why did I allow this for so long? Okay. And I just want to say, because whenever I say these things, people get upset. I'm not victim blaming. This is not victim blaming. I'm not saying you deserve this in any way. I'm not saying that it's your fault. But what I am saying is that you have some responsibility, and you need to start holding yourself accountable for what it is that you allow in your life.
Okay. So I have two things to that. So number one, I think that sometimes one of the reasons that it's so important to surround yourself with people who care about you is that sometimes you can't see it.
You can't.
And so in my experience, it has been incredible to have someone else serve as that mirror to you.
Yes.
And say, hey, you're worth more than this.
Yes.
Hey, you didn't do anything to deserve this.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you start to be alert and awakened to these issues.
Yes.
And so when you're at that point, that is the time that you need to do the work and explore why you're in this type of relationship. And that's where it's important to read everything you can about it and talk to people and surround yourself.
The information phase is important, but I caution people not to get stuck at the information phase, because this is not an intellectual exercise. Trust me, I know, because I have a PhD in narcissism and narcissistic abuse, okay? And still had difficulty.
Wow.
So it's not up here, everybody. It's here, okay? This is emotional work. And there are people out there that, profess to have programs to help you, to sort of rework that stuff. Melanie Tanya Evans is somebody who does it. Dr. Ramani has, so much information out there on narcissistic abuse. The Center for Hope of Western New York, which Lynn and I, we are providers. We have counselors and, like she said, coaches who understand narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Yeah. But you have to be the one to say, I am going to, I want more than this for my life. Yeah. I want to learn how to be a whole, healthy, healed person. And by the way, this is not something that happens overnight.
No.
We are all works in progress
Yes.
for the rest of our lives.
Yes.
But we want you to take that first step forward.
Yes.
We want you to say, I'm ready to learn. Because when people come into my office and they are, just kind of decimated by the avalanche of learning about the accounts and the affairs and the money that they've gambled away and the double life that they've had and God only knows what else. It's like you feel like you're paralyzed, like you can't move. Yeah. And so when you're in that scenario, you're in survival mode. It's when we have to triage, and we do. But I tell people, like, this is your work, because if you have to learn how to pull yourself out of, the power that you gave to this person, you need to reclaim that power for yourself. Right. And it's a process, I always tell people there's a lot of trauma here. Back to the childhood trauma, the stuff that set you up for to find these people in your adult life. That's the stuff that you have to go back into your past and, talk with a trained therapist. We have a therapist who, at Center for Hope, who does EMDR. There are lots of other licensed EMDR therapists, all over. And I would strongly recommend that, people who have suffered this type of trauma, if you've been in an abusive relationship like this, depending on, the amount of abuse and the amount of abuse that you suffered in your childhood, you're going to need to work through that trauma with somebody who is experienced, an experienced trauma therapist. In addition to learning and reading and maybe working with a coach and, you know, attending a support group like the Narcissistic Abuse Educational Recovery Workshop series that we have here.
Absolutely.
But you have to turn in and work on you. And little by little by little by little, I promise you this, if you invest in yourself, you are going to see a return on that investment. You're going to get stronger.
And guess what? You're worth it. So this is the time. Make that choice. Choose yourself.
Yes. So with that, Lynn, I think, I think we've given everybody a lot to think about. We've given, you some recommendations for books, for, people to follow on social media, contact Center for Hope of Western New York. If you think that, we might be able to assist you. And one last thing that I wanted to say is, Lynn and I, we want to hear from our audience. We want to hear from you.
Yes.
We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. So we now have
suggestions and ideas.
Yes, all of it.
Things you want to hear us talk about.
We now have an email. We are narcslayers@centerforhopewny.org. So NARC Slayers @centerforhopewny.org. You can email us. Those emails will come directly to Lynn and I. We actually just are going to have a whole podcast devoted just to answering your questions. But in the interim, Lynn does a blog. She might be able to address your questions there, or we might just bring it up in some of our podcasts.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you next time.